So, the topic I'm about to discuss is something that I have been wanting to talk about for a long time and have been talking about, just not really on camera, not really on my YouTube channel. But it is the topic of God. It is the reality of God, the reality of Source, the reality of, an ultimate reality. Um, and it's something that I've been very drawn to talk more about, kind of in a public way, and with friends and family. Uh, because of various reasons. I definitely, uh, I was raised Christian, so I've always had a relationship to religion. I've had a relationship with this idea of God or God, Jesus, biblical characters, biblical entities, my whole life, really. And I have a very fond memory of church. It wasn't, I have a lot of great friends from church, and I have a lot of good memories, youth group and Wednesday night live dinners, and just a very good community, good people. I wasn't raised Catholic, I wasn't raised in a Catholic all boys school and tormented, and the stories. But um, and I definitely went through a phase in high school where I fell away from God and religion. I wouldn't say that I became an atheist, but I definitely went through an agnostic phase where I just wasn't sure. Um, But I remember in ninth grade, I would still pray during the morning announcements or during the Pledge of Allegiance when that was still a thing in high school. I've been out for about 10 years now, so it's been a while. But I've found my way back through various paths, and not least of which has been my discovery of near-death experiences, people's accounts of coming close to death and or actually dying, but being revived and coming back with profound stories, and people having an experience of God, meeting the real God, meeting past loved ones, meeting intelligent spiritual beings, and just being downloaded with information and intelligence and an understanding of purpose and the reason that they came here and the reason why they had to come back, etc., etc. There's it's a deep rabbit hole when you start looking at near-death experiences. And at this point, I've probably watched hundreds, if not thousands, of videos on YouTube, and I've listened to so many stories. And at this point, I feel like I've gained a little bit of an understanding of what encapsulates different types of near-death experiences. But my point being, that has definitely changed my tune on God, and that was many years ago at this point, at least 5, I don't know. But yeah, so I've my return to the spiritual, my return to God has really made me want to talk about it more and talk about it a little more publicly and with friends and with family and possibly with strangers if they'd be willing to. But yeah, so I recorded a podcast with my longtime friend Jack and former roommate, still best friend. Um, yeah, where I ask him his opinion on God and whether or not he believes. But caveat, I don't know if believe is the correct word to use for God. Like, do I believe in God or do I know God? Or do I have a gnosis that God exists, that God is alive and God is real? I would say it's more on the gnosis side. Uh, and there's a certain point in my journey where it just started to feel like an obvious fact to me that spirit is part and parcel of this reality and actually the true reality, whereas matter matter is more a byproduct of spirit than the other way around. um, but yeah, this is a conversation where I ask Jack his opinion on whether or not he believes, to be determined on a better word than believe. But I go back to actually what Carl Jung has said about it in an interview that I watched of him, where he said he doesn't believe, he knows. He knows there is a God. And that just seems to resonate more with me than the word believe at this point. But yeah, so I hope to have more conversations like this. So if you enjoy the conversation, like and subscribe and share it with your friends, family, and whoever else you'd want to share it with. Hope you enjoy.
First thing on the frame.
Welcome to another episode of Offerings of Hope. I forgot the name of the YouTube channel for a second. It's been a while since I've recorded a video. But yeah, here with my good buddy Jack, longtime friends.
Hello.
And yeah, we're just going to have a conversation. You guys are going to listen.
Good old fashioned conversation.
Nuance. There's going to be nuanced views. So we're just going to get right into it. I actually wanted to start off by asking you about belief, or your gnosis. And we're going to jump right in with the idea of God. How did you, first of all, do you believe in God? Or do you know God? And who is God to you? If so.
Yeah, for sure. I do believe in God. Not as a man in the sky per se, but as kind of an underlying force. I mentioned I had an image a moment ago when thinking about this and how I might articulate it, and what I had an image of was, so I kind of like the notion of as above, so below.
Mm.
And I think something that describes that pretty well is fractals, because you can zoom way out and you can zoom way in, and it's kind of like the same thing repeating on the micro that you see on the zoom out that's on the macro. And I kind of thought of God as this like fire or fuel that is creating movement within the fractals and creating the continuation of it, whereas you keep zooming in and it keeps happening and it keeps like kind of blossoming into itself and out of itself. So I thought of God as like that fire, that fuel that's creating that movement. So it's kind of a driving force, is how I feel about God. I mean, if you ask me that question, I'd probably articulate it different every time because the nature of God is so vast. And I think having a name for God is sometimes deceiving, because it almost sounds like another name, like Nate or whatever in it, or Jack, and I think that can trick us into thinking God is more limited than it is. I like, you've heard me say this, but I'll say it again. I like the Krishna is a incarnate of God, kind of similar to Jesus, but in the Hindu culture, and they recognize this grandness of God and how there couldn't be a word to encapsulate it. So Krishna means all attractive. So I kind of like that notion of God being this force that, whether we know it or not, we're getting pulled to. I also talk about plants going toward the sun. Like we're all just plants going toward the sun. And it might take us a while to find the light, but I think we do all eventually find the light, which I guess is a controversial opinion to an extent, because there are a lot of people, I guess, who wouldn't consider themselves Gnostic, or they might be atheists and not have a belief in God. But to me, that almost doesn't even matter.
Right.
Like it's still happening.
They're going to find out eventually because
Yeah.
we all die. We all eventually leave our bodies. You know, at least that's the notion that I think we agree on. Like, there's a soul residing in these bodies that lives on. You know, it's consciousness, it's spiritual energy. It's probably it's impossible for us to fully describe what that is inside our human capacity, but we can call it spiritual energy that moves on after these bodies die. But yeah, you were reminding me of something when you were saying it's inevitable that we all are being attracted to God. I've heard that in multiple places. When I was reading A Course in Miracles, they talked about how we're all born and we're all on a spiritual path, whether we think we are or not.
Mhm.
We're all on a path, and you can completely forget that you're on a path. But they said the book, I guess it was allegedly the channelings of Jesus Christ, and you can procrastinate on your path basically as long as you want.
Mhm.
There's no time limit to how long you can avoid returning to God, but you're going to at some point. You're going to spiral down this path until you've reincarnated enough times to finally have your awakening, and finally, return home, which is another way to describe God as our ultimate home, our true origins as infinite beings of light. But yeah. So how did you come to a belief, or is it a belief, or is it like a knowing, or what is
At this
what is
point,
it
it is a knowing, yeah. And I think it actually started out that way, but then, the trials of life make you question things, and I think it's something you can maybe doubt or not be sure of. Boozy needs to get that out. I got you.
Noisy, loving cat.
Yeah, I mean, I wanna say that it was when I started meditating, but I feel like there was even inklings before that, of kind of just feeling like there was kind of deeper patterns to things. But yeah, meditation was definitely something that allowed me to explore myself and in a way tap into something that was beyond myself. Like when you quiet, quiet sounds and input from the ego, I feel like there's this tapping into an energy that's greater than ego. It's like the fractal idea again. Like I'm just part of this fractal, but I can recognize that it's a much bigger web, and I'm within that web. So in that sense, I kind of see myself and everyone else and everything else as a manifestation of God. So I think when you can quiet your ego or just quiet your thoughts, it kind of allows that opportunity to tap into that gnosis. And once I touched that, I kind of, it was so nice. I mean, it feels, I like got addicted to it, and I was in high school.
Addicted to God.
Addicted to God, and I didn't really think of it as God. I guess I thought of myself as a spiritual person. I was into spirituality, and I felt like there was something greater, but I guess I had a kind of bias toward or against religion and the idea of God. I didn't know that much about it. I wasn't raised in a super religious family, but there was definitely there was sort of this like hints of things I would get where like organized religion was like not the most true, or it was like corrupted. That was kind of my origins of religion, was thinking it was this thing that was corrupted. So I almost didn't, but I've kind of shifted since then, and you know, I've had this notion that I've been coming to recently, exploring Jesus more and the origins of other religions, that people are going away from religion because religion has gone away from itself. Like to me, the original, like Jesus and his disciples, other people who were of that nature, they were spiritual beings, and then they were, you know, sharing these messages. So to me, like being spiritual and being religious is kind of one and the same. So I've come to that place now where I respect religion at its core, and you know, there are in certain ways it is corrupted, but that's not what the core of it is. The
Right.
core of it is talking about, to
Right.
me, something that is true. And I see, you know, Jesus was a really good channel for God. He was like a very clear channel for God. But I think we kind of all have that potential within us to be channels of God, because I think we all are manifestations of God. And I think it's a matter of your gnosis and understanding more subtle energies, or kind of the bigger picture, and seeing yourself in that. But yeah, I think the more you kind of get clear on that, the more you become more and more of a direct channel to God. And I think people like gurus and people like Jesus, they're so magnetic because people feel how connected they are to God, and they feel that connection through that person. So I think we're kind of all in that process of strengthening our connection. Maybe we're not intentionally doing it, but like you were saying, over time, like you have your awakening, and I think you get to a point too when you feel the beauty and the abundance and the love that is God so much that you can't help but want to share that. Because like I was saying, it felt so good meditating. I was just like, oh my God, like nothing is happening, but I've just tapped into this frequency or the state of being that feels so like, how do I share this thing that's within me? And you know, there's avenues for doing that, but it's I think it becomes something so apparent that you want to share it. Yeah.
That reminds me, I was raised Christian. I was Lutheran. Went to Holy Trinity Lutheran Church for a long time, and I have a very good experience with. I have a good past with church. It was never, you know, oppressive to me. It was youth group, had a lot of friends, and there was a lot of. I had a good. I didn't have a negative relationship with God or Jesus. Like, I wasn't told I was going to burn in hell for eternity.
Yeah.
You know, what I remember from church is like, Jesus loves everybody. And everybody has the chance to go to heaven as long as you trust in the promise of God, essentially. Trust in the promises of Jesus. And why I brought this up, though, you made me think of, there's a certain point where you just become you have such an intimate relationship and such like a devotion to God, where you just can't, it's like there's just this urge where you need to tell people about it and share the good news, which that is said throughout the Bible. It's like, you know, Jesus taught, like, you need to share this news with people. And at the end of every church service, the last thing that the congregation said together was, share the good news. And the whole congregation just said in harmony, thanks be to God, like everybody at the same time. But yeah, proclaim the good news. Share the good news. It's like it becomes a responsibility almost to share about God as we like develop this gnosis and develop like a confidence in our gnosis, which is something we talked about recently, actually, like trusting in our intuition and trusting in these I guess spiritual downloads that we get in our daily spiritual practices of meditation and music and et cetera, but yeah, I feel more, actually fairly recently, like less afraid to share about this relationship with God to people. And I guess now it just feels more and more important with each day, just based on the state of our modern world. The falling away of religion, the falling away of purpose. Like there's a purposelessness that's kind of penetrating the modern mind and the modern. There's no like home for the soul right now. In the kind of hyper efficient, I'll use Graham Hancock's phrase, problem solving state of mind that we're always in as modern humans, which there's nothing wrong with solving problems, but yeah, like the bottom line, profit, getting things done, and yeah.
Something I wonder about, and I'm curious your thoughts on, do you think there needs to, because I think part of what requires us to have such a confidence and a clear connection to God, or a gnosis, is that you're gonna kind of face resistance in sharing the good news.
Yeah.
So it creates almost a hesitation in sharing it, because people have their own conceptions of what God is, and or even if there is a God, and their own conceptions on religion. So do you think it's kind of necessary at this point to articulate truths of the world outside of the context of religion, or do you think religion is there's still like enough truth imbued in it that it can be a solid avenue for people to say, if you're like God curious or whatever, funny thing to say, but you're a seeker, and you're looking, you want to find the truths of the world. Do you think religion is still kind of the top avenue for doing that? Because I know I've read multiple articles of just trends of people associating less and less with religion and more into spirituality, but that's very broad and can mean a different thing to each person. And like you were saying, there's no kind of like home for the soul right now. Like I wonder um, what is the most appropriate way at this point, and maybe it's on an individual basis and just being able to meet individuals where they're at.
Yeah. Well, you're making me think of the kind of bastardized versions of religion, and that's kind of what people who feel like they almost lost their faith in religion, because the God in the canon Bible is one full of wrath and one full of a lot of smiting going on in that
Suspicious
about
smiting
for
an all-loving God.
But a lot of but there's a lot of golden nuggets in all of the world's religions, not just Christianity, but
for sure.
But a lot of those religious teachings are just so terribly misinterpreted, for what their true meaning was.
Yeah.
And then we have the problem of the original translations how they've been translated so many times, and like the original. I just learned this recently. The original language that Jesus spoke in and the Bible was kind of written in was Aramaic, and how Aramaic translates to English, let's say, not all the words are the same, and not all the meanings come off the same. So it's yeah. So there's this idea of being lost in translation, interpreting the Bible kind of incorrectly, and getting a notion out of it that seems like, oh, well, that's not very enticing. Like that doesn't feel like a teaching that resonates with me. It's not one of like universal love and peace and acceptance and like an all loving God, but it's something lower than that.
Yeah.
Let's say, but yeah. So I do. I
draw people away.
Right, and to your point or to your question, I do think that religion it still is like just a gold mine and of purpose and wisdom for people to tap into, you know, because a lot of them point to the same things. Like there's the idea of the Holy Trinity in every single religion in the world, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But so yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is we have to. I don't know the original meanings and translations, not even close.
Yeah.
Right.
At this point, it's been
but there's
long game of telephone.
Yeah, and there's different ways to interpret it well and interpret it in like an inspiring fashion that I guess perpetuates love, which is we can argue is the ultimate spiritual energy, love. And we've all heard the phrase "God is love" and "love is God," and so I do think religion still has a place for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an important point though to make because I think one area that goes wrong in religion is the superiority, like this religion is ultimate truth, and then it kind of makes you weirdly. I mean, I think it can go a number of ways. It doesn't necessarily mean if someone is a different religion, you don't love them, but you might just maybe like pray they get on the right path or whatever. So like you can almost like think they're ignorant or naive or something, like think lesser of them because they don't believe in the same religion. But something that's so ironic about it is you mentioned like so many of them talk about a Holy Trinity, and I think so many of them really talk about all the same truths. I think a lot of the message is the same, which to me is just hilarious that we fight over it so much when like the general vibe of all of them is or of God is a loving God, and is that we should treat each other as we want to be treated, the golden rule, like there's so many of these things that are present in all of them, and I think it's funny we so quickly get away from that kind of core and start bickering over these nuanced aspects of them, and it's like we bicker over the nuance and like leave the core behind instead of the opposite of that. It's like we don't need to worry about the nuance so much. Like let's stick to the core of it and like feed that. And I feel like there just needs to be greater energy added to that notion, and that I could be Muslim and you can be Christian, and we could understand the parallels and embrace and celebrate those instead of fighting each other and building walls between each other because the nuances are different. And I wonder how we do that because people are, tend to sense.
Yeah, and that just and it creates division.
Mhm.
Yeah, and war,
Yeah.
holy war. But you're making me think of um, something that I've learned watching a lot of near-death experience videos and just accounts. It's something I refer to often because for me, I feel like I've picked up a lot of people are just spouting like spiritual wisdom because they just encountered spirit directly by crossing over to the other side and coming back and just having this complete gnosis of like, wow, God is real and spirit is real. Spirit is our true home, and this world is an illusion, but it's an illusion for us to grow and learn. But I lost my point. Or we just
Well, we were talking about a lot of different things. What you made me think of, it might bring back your idea, is just that things along those lines, near-death experiences, that's an example to me of something that's outside of the context of religion, but
Yes, that's what it was.
portraying the truth of religion. So
Yeah.
to me, it makes sense to have, highlight things like that are just real life experiences that aren't coming from a text. It's coming from firsthand experience, and trying to relate on those levels more so than, let me get the Quran and you get the Bible and let's talk about
Right,
the nuanced
right.
differences.
And
it's like that's a very different ball game than us just sharing our experiences.
Right. And that was my point. It was that
Nice.
when
Back
people
on track.
you got me back on track. When people go to the other side, they're not, and they have like a life review. It's like they're never shown like, oh, you studied the wrong religion. Like you got it all wrong. Like you weren't supposed to be studying the Bible. You were supposed to be studying the Quran. Or why didn't you study the Torah? It's like that is never what people's accounts are. It's all like it's based on your personal choices for sure, but a lot of them are smaller things that you wouldn't even expect to be so grand in a life review. And it usually doesn't even have to do with the success or the money that you made. Like money isn't even involved in that. Of course, it's not involved in your spiritual life review because money is not the purpose of us being here. But it's some people are shown when they hurt somebody, or when they said something, just a few words to somebody that were harsh, and then what happens is they experience that from the perspective of the person that they did it to, so they understand fully how they made that person feel, and they're in their shoes, and you feel the fullness of that emotion and the impact that you had on that person's life, and how that impacted them from that point on. So it's it is important. Our choices are very important because they ripple out and they do affect, but it usually does not have anything to do with the nuances of religion. It's like the nuances of the choices and how we impacted the people in our lives, for good or for worse. Did we improve? Did we make someone smile? Like some people have been shown that just all the times that they said a kind word and they gave someone a smile, and then they're shown the impact of what that did for that person for like days after that, or like a year after that. Like one smile that you give to somebody can change the course of their entire day. And we're removed from that effect unless we have unless we're very much like have an acute awareness about that. But it really does matter. The kindness of our words, the kindness of our actions, the quality of goodness that we're bringing to ourselves and then bringing to the world.
Yeah, it sounds like what I hear in that is like, when you make someone smile and make someone feel good, there's like a lightness to that, versus the opposite. There's a weight. Like if you made someone feel shitty and you're feeling the way that, or you're feeling the feeling of them feeling shitty, there's a heaviness to that. It's like dense. And you mentioned earlier how, you know, the physical plane, there's a lot of illusion, or you said it was illusion, and I kind of agree with that in ways where it's kind of a thing. The energy is generally very dense, so like it seems like we're here to ascend and get our energy back to a frequency of light, and that just makes sense in so many ways. Like the rising up, they call it the light within. Like it's a frequency, it's a feeling, but it's and when you feel like that, even on this plane, you almost have a weightlessness. You know, when you're laughing or in joy or whatever, there's you're not feeling gravity at that point. You know, you're beyond that. So it just makes it. It just feels so apparent that the point is for us to ascend, and to cultivate both within ourselves and with our world around us, including the people and the plants, everything. Cultivate ascension and growth, and getting to a higher frequency.
Yeah, there's a certain point where it almost seems so blatantly obvious at a certain point where it's like, man, when you notice just the absolute miracle of life around you, and you're like, okay, is this just all mechanical randomness generated by a dumb universe that's just materialistic and consciousness is just created by the brain? Or is it an adventure that our souls planned and decided to undertake for the reasons of, spiritual ascension, as you just mentioned? And it doesn't hurt to think the second thing. It doesn't hurt at all.
Feels pretty good, actually.
And I mean, we also were born into a body. We have no idea. We don't remember, although there are some people who do. But we don't remember where we came from, or if we came from anywhere. Some people think we came from nothing. You know, that one comedian talks about the nothing people.
Yeah.
But then we die and we merge back into that nothingness, you know. But it just seems like that we're born into this journey. We're born into this epic journey that we undertake, and we're born into like a storyline that's already taking place, and we're just like, all right, now we gotta live this life and do things and create things and go through things. And I mean, we learn regardless on whether or not we think we're here to learn for a reason. We're going to learn regardless, because that's just what this life is about. Like we're born at least materialistically knowing nothing, or we forget. We're meant to forget. But to my point, there's a certain point in your journey where a journey of awakening, where it's like, God, it's just so obvious at this point. Like we're here. We're here to ascend.
Yeah, and I feel like some people could make a materialist argument out of this, but to me, it feels like there's inherently something more to like the notion of like biological things wanting to stay alive. To me, like it feels like there's a reason that we want to be alive, for that growth, for that ascension, and I think a way you can see that so quickly is you try to drown someone who, like, you're gonna try so hard to not drown. If you're getting drowned, like you're gonna fight to stay alive with all you have. And to me, that just feels like it's because there's a reason to being alive. You know, we hold on to this life and we fight to stay alive because it's a sacred opportunity for growth. It's not just something that happens. humans.
Yeah,
you know, it's,
right. Yeah, we have that will, that like biological, well, yeah, and spiritual will to live because, yeah, we know we're undertaking something, at least unconsciously, we know we're undertaking something yeah, to be completed. And yeah, and that also coincides with the purposes of forgetting that there is, that there is life after death. Because if everybody knew that we were just returning to God immediately, and it was like this realm of perfect pure love, it's like we wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't necessarily want to stay here
here.
as much.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, it makes me think of the story of the egg too. Like we have to, and in reincarnation, as you mentioned earlier, we have to. If you haven't read the story of the egg, by the way, please go read that. It takes like 10 minutes. Or there's also a video on YouTube, but the egg by Andy Weir, really cool short story. I'll explain it very briefly. Basically, a guy dies and he goes and talks to this God figure. Um, and one thing too, you mentioned the kind of life review that happens after death that people experience, even in near-death experiences, is in the egg. The guy dies and he's talking to God. He's like, "Oh, what's going to happen to my family?" And God's like, "Oh, very good. Like, you're thinking about your family." He wasn't just thinking about himself and what his fate was. He was like, "Oh, what's going to happen to my kids?" Like, he was wishing well for them. So that was like a sign of spiritual growth because he wasn't just, um, ego oriented. He was thinking of beings beyond him, which I think is a definite sign of spiritual maturity.
yeah,
But he had to be reborn again. He had more learning to do, so he got to experience the plane of God, but he had to be reborn again because he had more maturing to do. And the story is essentially that you have to go through every life on earth in order to mature enough to go back to being a godlike being in that plane. Um, and I just love that concept so much. It resonates a lot with me. The earth being the egg in this place for us to mature. So I think, you know, um, you can get to that place. It's very dark, obviously, if wanting to end your life. But I think, yeah, people don't just do that thinking they're just gonna go back to a place of love. You don't just like back out. Like there's you came here and you're here for a reason. So you know tend to go through it, and you might not learn everything you need to learn in that life, but it is maturing you to be here. So there is value in it, even if there is a lot of hardship and whatnot. There's value in that, which is why we tend to. It's quite hard for us to take our own life.
yeah. I have heard there are some. It's not. It's not a lot of cases, but there are some cases of people who've had near-death experiences where the experience of most people who have near-death experiences never want to come back to Earth.
Yeah.
And when they do, they remember their near-death. They remember being there, and a lot of them go through a period of suffering where they just want to go back.
Yeah.
And but the purposes for coming back were necessary, and it was planned that they would come back and fulfill their what they planned to do and complete here in the earthly plane. But yeah, a lot of them go through a struggle, and some, not a lot of them, do try to take their life because they really want to go back.
Yeah, sure.
They want to go back, but that's never the answer.
Yeah.
It's never the answer.
I think more so, at least from what I've seen from those folks, they want to share the good news.
Right.
They want to.
A lot of them.
They write books and they do talks and they become speakers and they want to share it.
Yeah, and I've heard some experiences too, like people who did attempt to take their life and they had they went to the realm of God, but they were what was communicated was it's kind of like cheating to do that. Like
Yeah.
like you ended your life early, you know, and it's okay that you did that, but you didn't complete what your soul needed
Mm.
essentially. But yeah, that's a very small percentage
Yeah.
of experiences, and a lot of
Yeah.
people come back and they come back with such purpose and light, and
Mm.
and yeah they write books and
Yeah, and
communicate what they
I've
experience.
seen like a lack of or diminishing like anxiety from people too, because their trust is so great that they're going to return
Yeah.
to see loved ones again,
Mhm.
and they're going to essentially they discover everything's going to be all right. So even if they're still struggling on this plane, they've touched that other plane
Yeah.
of you are good,
Yeah.
you're supported, all this, everything's good. So having that gnosis um, seems to help a lot of folks experience it.
Yeah.
From what I've seen.
Absolutely. Yeah, God, having that as a foundation, oh, I touched God. I felt God's presence, and I saw the presence of my already past loved ones, even past pets, and it's just this inevitable reunion that every single person gets to experience, when we pass on and potentially reincarnate. But before we reincarnate again, we experience this just complete reunion of love, which is it's
Reunion,
enticing.
back into oneness.
Yeah.
One idea I feel that came up earlier, it's still relevant enough, that I feel is maybe one last thing I'd like to share. When you were talking about misinterpretations, um, and how we can kind of get the wrong idea about what God is through that. Um, and this is something I was trying to understand recently, so that's why I feel like I wanted to share it now, and I feel like I have come to understand it more, at least in a way that resonates for me. And it's the notion of fearing God. I was trying to figure out what that was about because that felt wrong to me. I was like, I don't get this notion of fearing God, and I've kind of explored it more. And the way I understand it now is it's in essence it's more of an honoring of God, and knowing that there's something beyond yourself that's more powerful than you, and there's kind of a surrender in that. But to me, it's more based out of honor, and it doesn't necessarily need to feel like fear.
Yeah. That notion seems like a reinterpretation by like the Roman Catholic Church. That almost seems like more like a control tactic to get people.
$19.99 a month
Yeah,
to get into
heaven. Yeah. Yeah,
if
like
you don't pay this fee,
and there's a quote where it's like the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, which there's that quote feels cool, like it feels wise, but I like what you're saying. Like God isn't asking us to fear it. Like it is an honoring of God. It's like a turn that around into I completely believe, like trust in God. I don't fear God because there's nothing to fear.
Yeah, you can surrender out of trust instead of fear.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of that notion of surrendering, because I feel like we can get in this place of constantly like resisting what's happening, or like trying to control too much, and we come into issues when we try to control too much, because we're never going to be able to control everything. So when you get in that mode of like feeling like you need to control, I feel like that's kind of the opposite of like surrendering a little bit to what God's hands or the holy hand, whatever. that's helped me like understand that notion more because I've heard a lot of people say that like yeah I'm God fearing like
Yeah.
and they're saying it in that way where it's not necessarily negative but to me it always sounded negative so I was
Yeah,
like,
it's like
why
a
are you
weird.
God fearing?
It's a weird way to
God's
say.
loving.
Yeah, it's a weird way to say they believe or
Yeah.
they know God.
Yeah.
But that's like the King James canon God, like the God that is like all powerful and will smite you if you do something wrong. But it's so you better be fearful and like cower in God's presence. But no, that's not the true God. The true God is fully benevolent, fully loving, fully empowering to its creations, which, referring back to what you said earlier, like we are all manifestations of God. We're fractals, yes, scattered across this creation in order for God to experience itself and come back to itself and know itself more fully. So why would a being like God create something to fear itself? Like that just seems weird.
Mm-hmm.
On that light note, we can wrap up.
I feel like we hit a lot of points there.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Offerings of Hope, and yeah, look out for more content. I'm trying to get back into doing these a little more regularly. Look out for some drumming content, maybe some jams, more individual studies of books. Some of the things we were discussing here, I was kind of pulling from Setting God Free by Sean O'Loir. I don't really know how to say his Irish last name, but I'll put it in the notes of the YouTube video. I have no affiliation, but just a good book I'm recommending.
Stay lit.
Peace.